Okay, I think we'll get started. So good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Matthew Munson. I'm the Managing Director of Talent in New South Wales, and welcome to our Australian Economic Update with Commonwealth Bank. I am delighted to introduce Stephen Wills on the next screen, an economist with CBA, who I'll hand over to shortly. Stephen presented to us at Talent internally just a few weeks ago, and we were so impressed with his insights, his commentary and predictions for the future that we asked him to come back and share them again today with Talent's amazing clients and contractors. So without further ado, Stephen, over to you.
Thanks so much. And it's a pleasure to be here to speak with everyone. So just by way of introduction, my name is Stephen and I'm an economist in the Global Economic and Markets Research team at the Commonwealth Bank. So I'll just spend sort of the next half hour or so just giving an update on the Australian economy. It's been a very sort of intense couple of months and quarters for the Australian economy. Lots been going on. We've seen interest rates rise. We've seen inflation at high levels. So just trying to sort of unpack all that and sort of give the CBA view on where the economy is headed over the next 12 months. And it's essentially looking at how interest rates will affect the economy over the year ahead. So can we just switch to that? So I might just start by popping up the slides and then focusing on the first slide, which looks at sort of what we see as quite a bit of an interesting point for the economy. So the chart on the left shows you the consumer sentiment index. Now a number that's below 100 indicates that there are more pessimists than optimists in the economy. And you can see that the number right now is at just 78 points. It's at very low levels and at levels that are consistent with a major economic dislocation. So outside of the initial phase of the pandemic in early sort of 2020, this indicator hasn't been this low since the early 1990s recession. So it's actually below levels of the GFC. And that suggests that there's a bit of a tough time ahead in terms of economic outcomes. But then on the flip side, the chart on the right shows you the unemployment rate. And that shows you it all the way back to 1949. And you can see that the unemployment rate at just 3.5% is at very low levels. It's almost at 50-year lows. And that suggests that the labour market is extremely tight and there's a lot of strength coming from that part of the economy. So what's going on? How do you square up these sort of very different indicators of the economy? And the way we think about it is we think of an economy that's at a turning point. And that means that depending on whether the data is more backward looking or forward looking, that'll give you quite a different picture of the economy. So we think sentiment is more of a leading indicator of the economy and points to things to come, whereas the labour market has been more of a lagging indicator that just showcases the strength of the economy over the past year or so. So just focusing a bit first on the labour market, it's quite clear in Australia that it's incredibly tight and there's very strong levels of labour demand as well. The chart on the left shows you just a range of different labour market indicators. And no matter how you slice and dice that data, you can see that unemployment is low, underemployment is also low too. So people who want jobs are getting jobs, and also the participation rate is near record high levels. So that's all showing quite solid strength in the labour market. We also are seeing as well job vacancies still at a very high level, and the ratio of job vacancies to the number of unemployed people is at its sort of narrowest in sort of the history of the series. So again, relative to the supply of labour available, demand looks to be quite strong. We're seeing as well signs that population dynamics are normalising, and that's helpful for the labour market as well. So Australia's population growth, a large part of that is driven by net overseas migration. Obviously, during the pandemic with closed borders, we weren't able to see those arrivals into the country. But since borders have reopened at the beginning of this year, we have seen that arrivals numbers spike back up to around its level prior to the pandemic. And what this means is that it's going to help to alleviate some of the labour shortages that businesses have been talking about. So that should help to sort of ease some of that pressure in terms of the difficulty in finding labor and being able to meet those sort of capacity concerns that businesses have. The chart on the right shows you what we call short-term non-resident workers. So these are people like backpackers, working holiday makers. That's made a comeback in recent quarters, but it hasn't been as quick to recover as the net overseas migration, which is more sort of permanent or long-term migration. Those have been more quicker to rebound, unlike the short-term non-resident workers. And they're more prevalent in terms of areas like agriculture or hospitality, but they are making a comeback. Now, given we are seeing some of that labour supply come back online via migration, we also are seeing as well some signs that the labour market is moderating. And that's sort of most clear in that left-hand side chart, which shows you monthly changes in employment on a trend basis. You can see those red bars there. It was at really sort of elevated levels at the beginning of this year. That slowed down quite considerably in recent months. It was sort of reached roughly around 15,000 or so new jobs created every month. And that's sort of the level that's required to keep the unemployment rate flat at that 3.5%. Now, we think this 3.5% unemployment rate is around the floor of the unemployment rate in this economic cycle. There are signs that we think you're going to see the unemployment rate pick up a bit gradually over coming months. The chart on the right shows you in red the unemployment rate, and then the blue line shows you consumers' expectations for unemployment with a 6-month lead time. And you can see that's pointing to a pickup in the unemployment rate over sort of the next 6 to 12 months. So we are seeing some fairly early signs of moderation in the labour market. Now, a really bright spot in the economy has been spending and demand so far. The chart on the left, I think, really sort of illustrates exactly how strong demand has been. So that shows you the monthly retail trade figures. And you can see that relative to that grey dotted line, which is the pre-pandemic trend line, retail trade spending is well above that trend. It's about sort of 15–16% higher than where retail trade would have been absent the pandemic. Now, some of that does reflect, that sort of pivot towards goods spending over the pandemic. So, closed borders and lockdowns, you weren't able to spend as much on services, and retail trade better represents some of that goods spending. But what we have noticed, based on our internal credit card data, that we are seeing spending patterns actually normalize. So the chart on the right just shows you the share of spending on services broken down by the different years. You can see, those blue lines in 2020 and 2021. The share of spending on services plummeted, obviously due to lockdowns and those sort of restrictions. Since the beginning of this year, we have seen a normalization. We are seeing spending patterns round about where they were sitting at prior to the pandemic. So we are seeing spending still strong, even as we've seen consumers return to more normal spending patterns. Now, as a result of the really strong demand, notably for goods, we have seen inflation rise quite strongly. And that's been driven primarily by goods inflation. The chart on the left just shows you goods inflation on an annual basis running almost at 10% a year. In contrast, services inflation is a fair bit lower at 4.1%. And you can see from the chart on the right as well that around 3/4 of the total increase in consumer prices is driven by goods inflation. So spending patterns over the pandemic did have an impact on goods inflation, and that's in addition to some of the supply considerations as well. So obviously we had a large increase in shipping and freight costs due to supply chain disruption that's contributed as well to goods inflation running a lot hotter than services inflation. We've also noticed as well that inflation is most acute for non-discretionary or essentials spending. This chart there shows you that non-discretionary spending is running well above the discretionary items. That's a bit concerning, I guess, for households, because these non-discretionary items are things that households, by definition, aren't able to as easily pull back from. So things like food and groceries, as well as petrol and transport, those things are essentials and needed for the household. And so they feel this most acutely in their household budgets because they can't pull back their spending as readily as if it was more concentrated in the discretionary side of the consumption basket. But to be clear, inflation has also broadened as well, so not just limited to one or two items. So we can see here, headline inflation is running at 7.3% over the year. A measure of underlying inflation, so it sort of abstracts away from one-off volatile changes. That's also running at 6.1%. And that's well above the RBA's inflation target, which is shown in the chart on the left in the grey band, which is 2 to 3% inflation on average over time. So we're sitting comfortably above that, and the RBA is trying to bring inflation back down to its inflation target. As I mentioned, inflation has been fairly broadly based. So the chart on the right just shows you the share of the consumer price index basket based on different levels of inflation. So you can see that red line there that shows that almost 80% of the CPI basket is experiencing inflation of greater than 3% on an annual basis. And that's the highest it's ever been, or for at least the past decade or so. So we are seeing that broadly based inflationary pressures in the economy right now. Turning to wages, and the story is a little bit different. Wages growth has been less strong. It is accelerating, but it is a sort of slow sort of grind up as opposed to the really sharp increase that we've seen in inflation. So the official measure of wages growth is called the wage price index. That's provided by the Bureau of Statistics, and that's traveling at 2.6% over the year to the June quarter. We'll get an updated read for the September quarter next week. But our internal CBA wage tracker, as you can see, which closely mirrors the wage price index, that suggests that wages growth accelerated to about 3% over the September quarter. So it is picking up, which is what we want it to be actually, but it is not as high as in many other economies. So you can see the chart on the right there. Australia's wages growth at about 3%, we think, is significantly below New Zealand, which is traveling at about 4%, and the US, which is traveling, 5 and a bit percent. So that means that wages growth hasn't been picking up as quickly, which means it hasn't actually been contributing all that much to inflationary pressures. Whereas in other economies, higher wages are actually driving some of the higher inflation outcome as well. So this chart here is from the Reserve Bank. It just shows you the different sizes of wage gains. And you can see that we aren't really seeing that broad-based pickup in wages. So we are seeing in that red line there that wages growth of more than 4% is becoming more prevalent. And in contrast, wages growth of between 2 to 3% has also picked up as well, but remains well below its levels prior to the pandemic. So we're not seeing sort of that broadly based wages gain, which gives us some sort of comfort that wages growth is picking up, but is not at a level that's going to be concerning for the Reserve Bank. So they don't need to sort of be reacting quickly to the wages data, unlike in many other economies. So onto the RBA now. The RBA has delivered a lot of interest rate hikes in a very short space of time. So over the past 6 odd months, they've delivered 2.75 percentage points of rate hikes over 7 meetings. So in April this year, the cash rate was just 0.1%. It's now at 2.85%. At CBA, our view is that the RBA is actually almost done with their rate hike cycle. Our central case is that the RBA only hikes once more by 25 basis points at the December meeting before they're going to be on hold. That's very different to what the market expects. So the blue and the green lines there to show you the different market expectations at different points in time. And the most recent numbers suggest the market is looking for the RBA to lift the cash rate to just over 4% sort of by the end of next year. Now, we obviously disagree with that market pricing, and I'll go through why over the next couple of slides. The key reason for that disagreement with the market pricing is that household debt in Australia is very high, and it's high not only relative to the history, but also high relative to many of our peer economies. So comparisons with, say, how high and how quickly the US and the UK are raising interest rates, we don't think is the appropriate discussion, because household debt is a lot lower, which means it has a less impact on the household side of the economy than it does in Australia. Now, in Australia, we also have offset accounts that helps to offset some of that debt and therefore the interest you pay. But even if you account for those offset balances, we are seeing as well that household debt as a share of income has increased over the past decade or so. Another big difference between Australia and the rest of our peer economies is the way that interest rates actually pass through to mortgage rates. So in Australia, we have a majority variable rate home loan market. So what that means is that when the Reserve Bank raises the cash rate, that flows through almost 1-for-1 to sort of higher mortgage rates for all mortgage holders. That's very different in many economies. So for instance, in the US, it's actually very common to have a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. And what that means is for borrowers who borrowed last year or the year before or refinanced at those very low rates, the interest rate cycle in the US hasn't actually affected their home loan repayments. In Australia, of the case, as the RBA has lifted the cash rate, we have seen that pass through to mortgage rates. Now, this chart here just shows you the pass-through of these higher rates between Australia in the blue lines and in the pink lines, New Zealand. And New Zealand has a larger share of fixed rate loans. And you can see that the thicker line shows you the average mortgage rate being paid. And you can see essentially what we're seeing is that there's been more tightening in Australia on this basis than in New Zealand, even though their policy rate has actually lifted by more than it has in Australia. Another key area to be aware of is while we are a mostly variable rate mortgage market, there's still a fairly large stock of fixed rate home loans that will expire over the next year. So while we're variable for most of the home loans, there is some sort of share that is fixed, but over a 2 or 3 year horizon, they become variable as well. So as they roll off, they will roll off to either higher variable or higher fixed rates. Now, what this means is that for these fixed rate borrowers, they're going to be rolling off onto these higher rates, which creates natural tightening in the economy because they'll see their mortgage repayments also lift and they'll have to pull back on their spending in order to be able to sort of meet this higher repayment need. And as I said, it creates natural tightening, which is why even if the RBA doesn't hike any further next year, you should still see the economy slow as this natural tightening occurs. So the key crux of our argument is that household debt is really high in Australia, and how debt servicing costs, i.e. mortgage repayments, how that changes based on the cash rate will have implications for the economy as a whole. So we see the cash rate right now actually as being at quite contractionary levels. So as it puts household debt servicing costs as a share of income at pretty much its highest level in more than 2 or 3 decades. And that's going to be creating sort of an impact on household spending as these impacts of the rate hikes start to bite. To give an idea of just how large these increases could be, the chart on the left shows you how repayments will increase for variable rate borrowers based on a 300 basis point increase in interest rates, which is our central scenario for the cash rate. Now you see the chart on the left, there's a grey bar on the left, which shows you about 1/3 of variable rate borrowers will see no change to their mortgage repayments. That's because over the pandemic period, as the cash rate was lowered, they didn't actually reduce the minimum repayments. They're still paying well above what the minimum repayment was required. So they're ahead and their repayments won't change as the cash rate changes. What we are more concerned about is that sort of the right bar there in the left chart, which shows you that around 30% of variable rate borrowers will see their mortgage repayment increase by more than 40%. As these rate hikes increase. So it's a really huge step change, which will be contractionary for the economy. Chart on the right is a very similar story, but just for the fixed rate borrowers. And that just shows you that around half of fixed rate borrowers will see their mortgage repayment increase by more than 40%. So again, a really large step change for these borrowers, although they have some reprieve until their fixed rate loans do expire. So what happens now? What are we looking for the economy, given just how quickly the RBA has tightened interest rates? And you see this chart here shows you the RBA has been among the most aggressive in the pace of its monetary policy tightening. It's akin to the US and in Canada. So one really timely measure is looking at how the flow of new housing credit is evolving. The chart on the left just shows you how new housing lending has eased quite significantly in recent months. So we are seeing housing loan approvals come off fairly sharply. That sort of makes sense given the higher interest rates. So higher interest rates reduce borrowing power. So for a given level of income you have, higher wages reduce your borrowing capacity. It also reduces your demand for housing. So people are less inclined to want to buy a house, for instance, if they see home prices coming off. Housing lending is a good indicator for where dwelling prices will go. Chart on the right just shows you how closely related housing credit is with dwelling prices, and it shows that we are going to see further declines in home prices over the next period ahead. Straight into home prices now. As you can see, and I know you're all aware, we have seen a fairly large decrease in home prices across Australia. They're down about 6.5% in Australia from their peak levels. A little bit larger falls in Sydney and in Melbourne and Brisbane, and smaller falls in Adelaide and in Perth. Now, our expectation is that home prices fall by about 15% peak to trough, and the chart on the right just shows you how that compares to previous house price cycles. It would be sort of the largest and quickest decline in home prices relative to previous cycles, but we do see that easing up sort of over the next, once the next 12 months do pass. That might seem like a really large decline in home prices, but context is really key here. So you've got to remember that over 2021 in Australia, home prices increased by 21% across the nation. So a 15% pullback would only sort of represent home prices coming back to the levels sort of early 2021. It wouldn't be sort of below where they were at prior to the pandemic. So that context of the really huge run up in prices over the pandemic period is important to keep in mind in the context of sort of this 15% forecast decline in home prices. You might have heard as well people talking about how our exchange rate has come up quite a bit, and as a result might lead to more imported inflation. As the chart on the left shows you, that's really only true for the Australian dollar relative to the US dollar. So the US dollar has actually been a lot stronger than most other currencies. So the cross between Australian dollar against US dollar has weakened. But if you think about based on a weighting of our trading partners, which is shown in that red line there, which is labeled the TWI, it actually has changed all too much relative to the beginning of this year. So what that means is that, yes, against the US dollar, it has weakened. And, if you want to travel to the US now, it's probably a bad time. But relative to sort of our imports, because a large share are denominated in Aussie dollars, and we also have trade with, say, China and Japan, one of our key trading partners, the impact of a lower Australian dollar relative to the US dollar isn't actually as pronounced. So I started this presentation looking at consumer sentiment, noting that it was at very low levels. And it's important to note this is actually not normal. At the beginning of a rate hike cycle, usually, we see sentiment at very high levels, and above that 100 mark separates optimists from pessimists. That's because usually the economy is doing really well, and so consumers are very positive and they want to spend. What's happening now actually is that even before the RBA started hiking, we did see sentiment at very low levels. It's only continued to fall since then. Now, we care about sentiment because it does relate quite closely with actual spending in the economy. We've noticed actually recently there's a bit of a gap opening up. So spending has still been really strong, although sentiment is at very, very low levels. So what's going on there? So we think a part of the story is because of the really large lag between when the RBA hikes the cash rate and when it actually impacts households' cash flows. So for CBA borrowers, there's on average about a 3-month lag between when the RBA hikes the cash rate and when mortgage holders' minimum monthly repayments actually reset. That's a combination of lags related to the time it takes to actually reset the minimum monthly repayment, but also the fact that we're required to provide almost a month's notice, or a bit more than a month's notice, to consumers or to mortgage holders before their mortgage repayments are reset higher. So what that means is that households are really only feeling the first couple of rate hikes, There's still many more that have already been implemented in the system, but have yet to flow through in terms of their higher mortgage repayments. So this is what's sort of very evident in this chart here. It shows you that in that red line there, that interest being charged started increasing pretty much from May when the RBA began hiking interest rates, but the scheduled repayment didn't actually start rising until August, which is about 3 months after the RBA's first rate hike in May this year. So there's still a lot more tightening to go in the economy, but we haven't yet seen that flow through, given the lags that we normally see with monetary policy. That being said, even though we haven't seen the full impact, we are seeing some signs as well that spending momentum is moderating. And it's been particularly the case for discretionary spending. So the chart on the left shows you data based on our CBA credit and debit card spending data. You can see for some categories like clothing and footwear and eating out, and also household goods, that's come off a fair bit. Recreation has been a bit of a standout. It's been performing pretty well. We think it's probably related to travel. So obviously with reopened borders, people are looking to go overseas or even interstate travel, and people would have booked this holidays well in advance and are now going to take them, and it has coincided as well with school holidays and a lot of other sporting events as well. So that's been quite strong, but we see that easing over the coming months. Another important point to note as well is that this is based on dollars actually being spent. But given where inflation is at, it's actually going to be quite different in a volumes sense. The chart on the right just shows you that what's happening for food retailing. So while the value of food retailing, so the dollar value spent on your grocery shopping, has increased significantly from the pandemic, in volumes terms, actually little change from prior to the pandemic. Those blue lines show you the volumes, whereas the red line and the chart on the right shows you the value. So inflation, which is the cost of living, but also we think the higher mortgage repayments are going to be working to slow consumer spending over the months ahead. So I'll just leave it on this slide here and just note that we do see the economy slowing more sort of materially next year. We see growth below the trend level over the next year. We see the unemployment rate picking up a little bit as the economy does slow. We see inflation actually slowing a lot more quickly than the RBA expects it to, as we see sort of demand easing off and supply issues actually resolving themselves. The point to make, and that's highlighted in the red there on the very bottom, the last point, is that the economic outcomes that we will see over the next year is determined by the Reserve Bank. How much more tightening they deliver to the economy, or whether they do pause, that will dictate economic outcomes over the next year or so. If the RBA does pause after December, like we expect, we see a fairly softish landing in the economy. But if the RBA continues to hike as the next year approaches, we might see sort of materially worse economic outcomes. So I might just leave it there for today. Thank you all for listening, and I'm open to any questions if there's any from the audience. Thank you.
Hello, yeah. We haven't had any questions come through, Stephen. You've obviously answered everything anybody could possibly want to know, which is great. But I hope everybody that joined us today found that as insightful as I did. I thought it was a really good snapshot of where we're at, and it really demystifies some of the things that are going on in the market. So thank you so much. I hope everybody today enjoyed it. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye-bye.